I'm a 22-year-old woman who inherited the house I grew up in from my mom after she passed away last year at 47 from a sudden stroke. I've come to terms with her passing. My parents divorced when I was 7, so I split my time between my mom and dad. I was always closer to my mom because she understood me, while my dad, now 50, was often too busy with work or women to give me much attention. As long as I had my mom, I was okay with it. After I turned 18 and started college, my dad moved to Houston for work, so we only saw each other during the holidays. 2 years ago, he brought his girlfriend, Julia, and her 2 daughters, 18 and 16, to spend Christmas with us. It was surprising since he'd never introduced any girlfriends to us before. We welcomed them warmly, and everyone got along well. Even after that, Julia was always sweet to me on the phone, though her daughters were shy and kept to themselves. When my mom passed, she left the house to me. She had wisely divided her assets in her will when I turned 18, always planning ahead. After graduation, I decided to move into the house and find a local job, wanting to stay in my childhood home for a while. My dad wasn't happy about my mom's decision and made sure I knew it. He and Julia had been supportive during the funeral, but he became morose once he realized he wasn't getting the house back. This house was where my parents lived when they first got married, but my mom took it over during the divorce, which I think was fair since my dad didn't have to pay alimony. Mom gave up her career to raise me, letting my dad focus on his job. She worked hard to make sure I never felt neglected. I thought it was unfair for my dad to be upset about not getting the house back, and though he didn't say much, his behavior showed his displeasure. At the time, I didn't care. I was still grieving my mom, so my dad being annoyed about her will was the least of my worries. She left him all her wedding jewelry and the gifts he gave her, which should have been enough for him. He went back to Houston with Julia a few weeks after the funeral, and I've been living on my own since. About 6 months ago, my dad told me he was engaged to Julia and wanted to get married here. He planned to come back for the weeks leading up to the wedding, staying in the house rather than a hotel. Their daughters were homeschooled, so that wasn't an issue. I agreed to let them move in with me because I was tired of living alone, and I got along well with Julia. Plus, my dad promised to split all the bills. They moved in a month ago, and it was nice having them around. I felt less lonely and thought I could get used to it. I even dreaded the day they'd leave because I didn't want to be alone again. But 2 weeks ago, 3 days before the wedding, my dad asked if they could move back here permanently. I was surprised, but he explained he wanted to ease me into the idea of being part of a family and didn't like me living alone. I wanted to say yes immediately, but his behavior about not getting the house back made me hesitate. As much as I liked the idea, I didn't think it was wise to make a quick decision. I needed time to think. It felt logical to wait and not act on my emotions. I told him I needed more time and would let him know after the wedding. He looked annoyed but didn't push it. 10 days ago, they got married, and we had a blast at their wedding. They were supposed to stay a few more days before moving back, so I was preparing to tell them my decision, which was a yes. But before I could, they all took off on their honeymoon without telling me. 2 days after the wedding, I woke up alone. Their belongings were still here, so I tried calling them, but nobody answered for hours. Finally, around noon, Julia called back and casually informed me they had left for their honeymoon and would be back in a week. I was stunned. I expected them to at least tell me or include me in their plans. I asked why they hadn't told me, and she gave a lame excuse about forgetting but assured me they'd be back soon. I tried to explain that my issue was with them leaving without a word, but she brushed it off, saying my dad was busy and didn't have time to talk. I kept my cool and asked her to let me know when my dad was available. Her tone changed, and she became snarky, saying my dad was busy for the next few days and I shouldn't bother them. She told me not to act hysterically just because I felt left out, reminding me I wasn't a child anymore and needed to accept that my dad had a new family. She wanted me to get over it and clean the house before they returned. I was furious. I decided not to call my dad and was grateful I hadn't agreed to let them move in before seeing this side of Julia. There was no way they were living with me anymore. I packed their belongings as haphazardly as I could, stuffed them in cardboard boxes, and left them in the yard. I didn't care what happened to their things. They didn't belong inside my house. Yesterday, they came back from their honeymoon. Luckily, I was at work when they found their stuff in the yard. I had changed the locks, so they couldn't get in. My dad was extremely pissed when he contacted me about it. He told me I was being a brat and overreacting, claiming they did nothing wrong. I told him to take their boxes and leave, and if they were on my property when I got home, I'd call the police. He cursed and hung up. I had to get back to work and couldn't waste time worrying. When I got home, their things were gone. I thought it was over, but around midnight my dad called. Julia apologized, saying she wanted to make amends and didn't want bad terms over something petty. I told her to shut up and leave me alone. Her sudden change felt fake, clearly driven by not being allowed to live with me anymore. If she had any regrets, she would have apologized sooner, not after their vacation. My dad wasn't sorry either. He tried to guilt-trip me, saying I was heartless for not letting them stay, offering to split bills. He claimed he wanted to live here to feel closer to my mom. Julia's outburst was just a bad mood, he said, and even her kids missed me. But I wasn't having it. I knew my dad had his eye on this house since the divorce, and after seeing Julia's true colors, I didn't want to risk it. I told him they could go back home. He started bawling, accusing me of being selfish, saying I was ruining his happiest memories. He called me petty and mean, saying my mom would hate this side of me. But I stood my ground. I wasn't letting them move back in after Julia's rudeness and their lack of consideration. Update. The comments on my original post were a reality check. Some were rude, but I got the point. I stuck to my decision. My dad doesn't deserve to live here after being awful to me. It was nice while it lasted because they were sweet initially, but their true colors showed once I said I needed time to think. They thought they could intimidate me, but I'm not that weak. I'd rather be lonely than spend time with the wrong people. I shouldn't have let them come here at all. My dad's reaction when he learned the house was mine should have been a red flag. It showed me how materialistic and selfish people can be. As for Julia, I'm glad she picked a fight with me and messed things up for herself. If she hadn't, we might have ended up as a happy family, but I won't fall for their fake behavior again. I was lonely, missing my mom, and with no grandparents left. I needed a family for support, but these people aren't it. I'm relieved I realized this before it was too late. It's been a few days since they left, and my dad keeps calling and texting, hoping for another chance. But they don't deserve it. They blew their one shot, and I can't risk giving them another. I feel bad treating my dad like this, but he never put in much effort with me. He doesn't get to complain now that I'm making decisions for myself. Update. My dad's desperate to move in because he lost his job months ago. He spent all his savings on the wedding and honeymoon. Julia quit her job to be a stay-at-home mom, so now they're broke. My dad assumed I'd let them stay. Julia didn't know the truth until recently, which is why she apologized. She's as fake as they come, but that's what my dad deserves. Today, my dad asked to stay a few days until he finds a job. I told him no. They've been nasty to me, and I don't need that negativity. He should have known better than to splurge on a wedding and honeymoon without a job. That's not my problem, and I refuse to feel guilty. I texted him back, explaining this politely. He took it as mockery and said I'd suffer for what I was doing. I didn't respond because anything I say will be turned against me. It's better to let him wallow in his misery. It's not my problem anymore. Update 3. My dad decided to leave the city today, but couldn't do it silently. He made sure to let me know what a huge disappointment I am as a daughter. He and his wife had to make a whole scene out of it. I last spoke to him about 3 weeks ago, but we didn't check in with each other after that. Today, both he and Julia texted me, saying they were delighted to announce that Julia's ex-boyfriend decided to sponsor their trip back home. Apparently, he realized he needed to see his daughters. Julia had full custody, and her ex paid child support, but was too busy to spend time with his kids. He waited for Julia and my dad to sort things out, but finally decided to step in himself. They didn't give me all the details. They posted a picture of their daughters with Lucky Charm and 4-leaf clover stickers. I can guess the real story behind Julia's ex's sudden epiphany and why he's funding their trip. Julia's manipulation and stubbornness likely played a role. I've seen that side of her before. I don't know exactly what happened, but I'm just relieved they're leaving. This will be the last I have to deal with them. Reading other people's stories about their crazy families made me realize I had it easy. My dad is too worried about his reputation to harm me. He knows I call the cops without hesitation. Plus, I have enough training to defend myself. With them gone, I have even less reason to worry. I still feel lonely sometimes, but instead of dwelling on it, I go to my friends. After my mom passed away, I shut everyone out without realizing how alone I'd become until I read the comments here. It's going to take time, but I'm going to make the best of my life now. I have a stable job, a decent income, and my own house, thanks to my mom. I have great friends who care about me. Honestly, what more do I need? If I get into trouble again, I'll just come back here. I'm sure the wonderful people on Reddit will bail me out once again.
This story is titled, Parents Raised My Rent to Support, Deadbeat Sister Boyfriend. So I left and now they are begging me for help. Hey, first-time poster here. I'm Alex, 23 male, and things have been pretty chaotic in my life recently. I don't usually share personal stuff like this, but I need to vent and hear your opinion. I'm currently in college and grinding my way through life with a full-ride scholarship and 2 part-time jobs. I live at home with my parents, which sounds great on paper because it's rent-free, but trust me, it's not as easy as it sounds. See, I've got a sister, Kara, who's 25 female and the certified golden child of the family. And when I say golden child, I mean she can screw up royally, and my parents will find a way to spin it like she's the second coming of Christ. Let me paint you a picture. Growing up, Kara could do no wrong. If she brought home a C on her report card, my parents would celebrate it like she'd won a Nobel Prize. She tried her best, they'd say. Meanwhile, if I got a B instead of an A, it was, "What happened, Alex? You're smarter than this." Kara was the type who barely lifted a finger at home. Chores? Not her thing. If she didn't do the dishes, my parents would shrug it off, saying, "Oh, Kara must have been so busy with her friends." But if I forgot to take out the trash, it was a whole lecture about how I needed to be more responsible. It doesn't stop there. Kara had this ex-boyfriend, Greg, who was the absolute worst. He was manipulative, controlling, and quite frankly, a user. Greg had Kara wrapped around his finger, and she couldn't see it. He would borrow money from her constantly, guilt-tripping her about how he needed help to get back on his feet. Guess what? He never did. Kara worked a decent job for a while, but every dime seemed to end up funding Greg's shady ventures, like his failed music career and random trips with his buddies. What's worse is that when I tried to point out Greg's obvious manipulation, I was told to stay out of it because I didn't understand their connection. My parents? They weren't much help. They'd brush it off with, "Kara's a grown woman. Let her make her own choices." Which, fine, fair enough. But when Greg eventually dumped her and left her in financial ruin, guess who my parents leaned on to pick up the pieces? Me. Now don't get me wrong, I didn't hate Kara growing up. She wasn't mean to me or anything. But the favoritism was hard to ignore, especially as we got older. While I was busting my ass in school, Kara was coasting through life. She barely passed high school, didn't bother with college, and started working at random retail jobs that never lasted more than a few months. My parents, of course, always had excuses for her. "She's just figuring herself out," they'd say. When I got my scholarship and started college, I thought maybe things would finally shift. I mean, I was doing everything right, getting good grades, working hard, planning for my future. But nope, Kara was still the star of the show. When she got a job at a boutique last year, my parents acted like she'd been elected to Congress. "She's working so hard," they gushed. Never mind that the boutique barely pays her minimum wage, and she spends half her paycheck on clothes she doesn't need. When Kara finally moved out into her own apartment, I was relieved. I thought, finally, some peace and quiet. But that didn't last long. It started with little comments from my mom. Kara's having a hard time with her rent, my mom said one evening while we were watching TV. She sounded hesitant, like there was more she wasn't saying. I just nodded, figuring it wasn't my problem. She's trying so hard, but things are just so expensive, my mom added. Yeah, I guess, I said, not really paying attention. Then, a few weeks later, the real conversation happened. My parents sat me down at the dining table like we were about to discuss some life or death situation. Alex, we've been talking, my dad started. Uh-oh, I said, half joking but already feeling a sense of dread. My mom jumped in. You're doing so well in school and we're so proud of you. You've got that scholarship, you're working hard. You're really setting yourself up for success. Thanks, I said, still unsure where this was going. Well, Kara's struggling right now, she continued. Her rent is really high, and her job just doesn't pay enough to cover everything. I frowned. Okay, and? We were thinking, my dad said, since you're saving so much with your scholarship and you're living here rent-free, maybe you could help her out a little, just for a few months until she gets back on her feet. I stared at them, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. You want me to pay Kara's rent? I asked, my voice louder than I intended. She's your sister, my mom said, as if that explained everything. She's an adult, I replied. Shouldn't she figure it out herself? She's trying, Alex, my dad said, his tone turning stern. Not everyone has the same opportunities you've had. You're in a position to help, and it's only fair. Fair, I shot back. How is it fair that I'm working 2 jobs and going to school full-time, and now I have to pay for Kara too? You're being selfish, my mom said, shaking her head like I'd just kicked a puppy. If the situation were reversed, Kara would help you. I seriously doubted that. We argued for what felt like hours. I told them it wasn't my responsibility, that I was already stretched thin, and that Kara needed to learn how to manage her own life. But my parents wouldn't budge. She's your family, my mom snapped. You'd let her drown while you swim? She's getting a raise soon, my dad added. It's just 3 months. She'll pay you back. At that moment, I told them I will think about it, and went to my room questioning myself. How much am I supposed to give? 3 months might turn into 6, then a year. If Kara keeps struggling, or spending, will I be expected to keep bailing her out? What I'm really trying to figure out is if I'm wrong for feeling this way. Should I just bite the bullet, pay her rent, and avoid any drama? Or do I have a right to feel like this whole situation is unfair? I've always been the one to keep the peace in the family, but this is pushing me to my breaking point. I'm tired of always being the one to sacrifice while Kara gets a free ride. And that's where I'm stuck. Do I stand my ground and risk blowing things up with my family? Or do I keep quiet and let the resentment keep building? If anyone's been through something like this, I'd really appreciate hearing how you dealt with it. When I make my decision, I'll post here. Stay tuned. Update 1 point. Okay, guys, it's your butt, Alex. So, eventually, I caved. My parents didn't exactly leave me much of a choice. They kept piling on the guilt, saying things like, Kara would do the same for you, or, you're in a position to help, Alex. It's what family does. So, yeah, I agreed. I told myself it wasn't worth the argument, and maybe helping her out would keep the peace. But now, sitting here and looking at the bigger picture, I'm starting to feel like I've been set up. From the moment I started sending her money, Kara acted like it was the most natural thing in the world. Not a single thank you, no acknowledgement that I was making sacrifices to help her out. Instead, she kept doing what she always does, posting Instagram stories of her latest shopping hauls, brunch outings, and fancy coffee drinks that cost more than my daily lunch budget. I tried to ignore it at first. I told myself, maybe she's using her own money for that stuff. Maybe she's cutting back in other areas. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to believe. Last week was the tipping point. Kara posted a story of herself at a spa with the caption, Self-Care Weekend. Self-care? I'm working 2 jobs and covering her rent, and she's taking spa weekends? That's when I decided to ask my mom about it. So, Kara's rent is all covered now, right? I asked, trying to sound casual. Yes, thank you for helping her, my mom said, clearly pleased with herself for orchestrating this. Cool, just wondering. Does she, need more help? I asked. What do you mean? Well, I said, choosing my words carefully, she doesn't seem very stressed. I mean, she's been shopping and going to spas. Doesn't really look like someone who's struggling. My mom gave me a look like I'd just insulted the Pope. Alex, she's allowed to enjoy herself. Just because she's having a hard time doesn't mean she can't take a break every now and then. Sure, but how is she affording all this? I pressed. She's using her own money for that. You don't have to micromanage her life? Micromanage? I'm the one paying her rent, and I don't get to ask questions? I let it go, but the frustration was bubbling over. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something wasn't adding up. Kara was supposed to be broke. I kept checking her social media. Her Instagram captions were vague, almost like she didn't want anyone to ask too many questions. Living my best life, one post read. It didn't sit right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I wasn't trying to control Kara's life. I just wanted to understand how this situation made sense. But whenever I asked about her struggles, she'd dodge the question or change the subject. It's just complicated, she'd say, which only made me more suspicious. But I could see I wasn't going to get anywhere with Mom, so I dropped it. That conversation planted a seed of doubt in my mind that only grew stronger with time. I started paying closer attention, looking for anything that might explain how Kara was living so comfortably despite her supposed financial struggles. One evening, I was at my parents' house again when I overheard Kara on the phone. She was in her old bedroom, talking in a hushed voice. "No, I told you, I'll send it tomorrow," she said. "Just stop freaking out, okay?" I froze. Who was she sending money to? Wasn't I the one covering her rent? I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I remembered something my cousin Matt had mentioned a few weeks earlier. "Did you know Kara's been hanging out with Greg again?" Matt said casually during a family barbecue, leaning against the counter. I frowned. "Greg? Her ex? Why?" Matt shrugged. "Dunno. Saw them at that coffee shop by her place. Looked cozy." He paused, then added, "You ever notice Kara's been acting weird?" "Weird how?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "I don't know," he said, taking a sip of his drink. "She's been way more private than usual. Like she's hiding something big." I laughed it off, but his words stuck with me. What could Kara possibly be hiding? Greg was supposed to be ancient history, a deadbeat who'd mooched off Kara for years before she finally dumped him. Or so I thought. The way Matt mentioned him, almost like it wasn't over, gnawed at me. I ignored it then, but now I wish I'd paid attention. I decided I needed to dig deeper. That night, I went home and opened up Venmo, searching for Kara's account. I felt a little guilty snooping, but I justified it by telling myself I had a right to know where my money was going. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. There were multiple consistent payments to Greg. The captions were vague. For groceries. "You owe me one. Thanks again." I stared at the phone screen, trying to realize my money wasn't going to Kara's rent, it was going to her ex. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Here I was, working overtime and cutting back on everything just to help her, and she was using it to support someone who'd already taken advantage of her once. I spent the rest of the night stewing in anger and disbelief. I don't know whether to confront her immediately, or should I calm down and think it through. This isn't about the money anymore. It is about the lies. I actually have a lot of questions to Kara, and most probably will confront her. I'll keep you updated. Update 2: Hey, Alex here again. Things blew up way more than I expected. I wasn't planning on making a huge scene, but when you get pushed to your limit, it just happens. A quick side note, my cousin Matt, the guy who knows everyone's business, is the only person in my corner right now. He's been hearing me vent about all of this, and even warned me about Kara hanging out with Greg again. He convinced me to confront her, saying, "If you don't handle it, she'll keep walking all over you. She's used to you keeping quiet." So, armed with frustration and Matt's encouragement, I decided to talk to Kara face to face. That weekend, Matt came with me to Kara's apartment. I needed backup, someone who could keep me grounded if things went sideways. When we got there, her car was parked outside, so I knew she was home. Matt gave me a nod, and I knocked on her door. Kara opened it, looking surprised, and not in a good way. Her eyes darted between me and Matt, her body stiff. "What are you guys doing here?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "We need to talk," I said. She sighed, glancing back into her apartment. "Now's not a good time, Alex." "Too bad," I said, stepping inside before she could stop me. Matt followed, closing the door behind him. Her apartment was tidy, but the tension in the air was thick. Kara crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "What's this about?" I wasted no time. "Greg." Her face paled. "What about him?" "I know you've been giving him money," I said, my voice calm but firm. "The money I've been sending you for rent. I've seen the payments, Kara. Don't lie to me." Matt stood by the door, arms crossed, giving her a look that said, "Don't even try to weasel out of this." Kara's jaw tightened, and for a moment she said nothing. Then she scoffed. "Wow, Alex, snooping through my Venmo? Classy." "Don't deflect," Matt cut in. "Just answer the question." She glared at him before turning back to me. "Fine. Yes, I've been helping Greg. He's in a tough spot, okay? A tough spot? I said, my voice rising. Kara, are you kidding me? Greg is the reason you were broke in the first place. And now you're taking my money to bail him out? You don't get it, she snapped. I didn't want to tell you because I knew you'd freak out like this. Of course I'm freaking out, I shouted. I've been working 2 jobs to help you, and you've been lying to me this whole time. Lying? I didn't lie, she said defensively. I just didn't tell you. That's the same thing, I said. Do Mom and Dad know about this? She froze, her face flushing. Number. And they don't need to. Oh, they're going to, I said, turning toward the door. Alex, wait, she said, panic creeping into her voice. No, I said firmly. I've had enough of this. Matt and I drove straight to my parents' house. On the way, he kept saying, You're doing the right thing. They need to know the truth. Kara can't keep playing the victim. When we got there, my parents were in the living room watching TV. I walked in, not even bothering to sit down. We need to talk, I said. My mom muted the TV, looking concerned. What's going on? It's about Kara, I said, my voice steady. She's been lying to all of us. She's not struggling to pay her rent. She's been giving money to Greg. My dad's eyebrows shot up. Greg? Her ex? Yes, I said. The same guy who used her for years. She's been taking the money I've been giving her and funneling it to him. My mom's face tightened, and for a moment, I thought they were going to be angry at Kara. But then she sighed and said, Alex, I think you're overreacting. I blinked. What? She's been lying to us. She's trying to help someone she cares about, my mom said. You don't know what Greg's going through. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What Greg's going through? What about what I'm going through? I've been working nonstop to help Kara because you guilted me into it, and now you're defending her? Alex, calm down, my dad said, his tone firm. Kara's your sister. Family helps family. Are you serious? I said, my voice breaking. You're really going to side with her after everything she's done? She's not perfect, my mom said, but she's doing her best. No, she's not, I said, my anger boiling over. She's been lying, manipulating, and taking advantage of me, and you're letting her get away with it. Enough, Alex, my dad said, his voice sharp. This conversation is over. I looked at them, my chest heaving with frustration, and realized something I'd been avoiding for years. They were never going to hold Kara accountable. Fine, I said, grabbing my keys. If you won't do anything about it, I will. I stormed out, Matt close behind me. When we got to the car, he turned to me and said, Well, that went about as expected. Yeah, I said bitterly. They'll never change. After a few days, the pounding on the door pulled me away from the sink where I was rinsing out a coffee mug. It was late. My parents were sleeping, and I wasn't expecting anyone, so the sound alone was enough to put me on edge. When I opened the door, Greg stood there, looking like hell, unkempt, swaying slightly, and reeking of sweat. What the hell do you want? I asked, gripping the edge of the door. Greg pushed past me without answering, brushing crumbs off the arm of the couch before dropping onto it like he owned the place. He tilted his head back and let out a loud, exaggerated sigh, as if he'd just come from some great battle. Kara's not answering her damn phone, he said finally, glaring up at the ceiling. Yeah, she doesn't live here, I snapped, closing the door harder than necessary. Why are you here? Greg ignored my question. She thinks she can just cut me off like that. Keep my kid away from me. Nah, not happening. I froze mid-step, my pulse quickening. What are you talking about? He tilted his head toward me, a crooked grin spreading across his face. Come on, Alex. Don't play dumb. You know. I didn't respond. Greg sat up straighter, his grin widening, when he realized I genuinely had no idea what he was talking about. She didn't tell you, huh? He said, almost gleeful. Of course she didn't. Wouldn't want to ruin her perfect little story. Tell me what? I demanded, my voice sharp. Greg leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Your dear sister, he said, dragging out the words, has a kid. My kid. 2 years old. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at him. He leaned back against the couch, watching me like he was waiting for the explosion. You're lying, I said finally, though my voice lacked conviction. Greg barked out a laugh. Yeah, that's what she'd love you to think. But no, man. It's the truth. She's been paying me to keep it quiet. Doesn't want the world to know she's not as perfect as mommy and daddy like to think. The words hit like a sledgehammer. Kara had a child, and she'd kept it a secret from everyone, including me. Greg rubbed his face and sighed again, this time with exaggerated frustration. I mean, she's got you footing the bills, doesn't she? Living the high life while keeping me out of my own kid's life. It's bullshit, man. His words hung in the air, thick and heavy. My stomach churned as the pieces started to fit together. Her defensiveness. Whenever I asked about her finances, her response was always the same. It's complicated. She'd snap if I pressed her, her face turning red as she muttered, "You wouldn't understand." Back then, I thought she was just embarrassed. Now I wonder if she was hiding something bigger. But now I know better. The money going to Greg, the Instagram posts of brunches and shopping trips. "She's sending you my money," I said, more a statement than a question. Greg shrugged, smirking. "Guess you're not as clueless as I thought." The rage bubbled up before I could stop it. I stepped closer, my fists clenched. "Get out!" I growled. Greg stood slowly, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Fine. I'm leaving. But you tell Kara she doesn't get to rewrite history. This isn't over." I opened the door and stood there, glaring at him until he stumbled out into the night. The silence in the house felt suffocating after he left. I sat on the edge of the couch, my mind racing. Kara had a child. She'd lied to everyone about it, not because she was scared or ashamed, but because it was inconvenient for her. According to her Instagram, she was living her best life, keeping her mess secrets while taking money from me and using it to keep Greg quiet. This wasn't the behavior of someone struggling to get by. Kara wasn't struggling. She was coasting, using everyone around her to maintain her cushy lifestyle. And worst of all, she dragged me to her own shit. The next morning, I couldn't sit still. The anger simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. I called Matt, the only person I knew who wouldn't sugarcoat things. "Greg showed up at the house last night," I said as soon as he picked up. "Why?" Matt asked, his tone already skeptical. "He was drunk, ranting about Kara, about their kid." There was a pause. "Their what?" "She has a kid," I said bitterly. 2 years old. She's been paying Greg to keep it a secret." Matt let out a low whistle. "Man, that's messed up. And your parents don't know?" "Of course not," I said. "If they did, they'd probably still find a way to defend her." "Oh, she's doing her best," I mocked bitterly. Matt didn't laugh. "You're right, though. They'll defend her no matter what. But Alex, this isn't something you can let slide. She's been using you. That's not just shitty. It's cruel." "I know," I said. "And I'm done." "Good," Matt said firmly. "So what's the plan?" I didn't answer right away. My mind was already spinning, calculating my next move. Kara had spent her entire life getting away with everything because people like me let her. That was about to change. "She thinks she can keep walking all over me," I said finally. "But she's about to learn how wrong she is." And I meant it. This wasn't about making peace or keeping the family together anymore. It was about making sure Kara faced the consequences of the life she'd built on lies and manipulation. For once, she wasn't going to walk away unscathed. I've got something clever in mind, just to make sure they think twice before messing with me again. Wait for my next update if you're interested. Update 3.0. Hey people, it's Alex again, and I'm here to spill the tea. Well, as I was planning my next move, the eviction notice landed like a thunderclap. I hadn't meant to open it. It had been addressed to Kara but delivered to my parents' house. I found it sitting on the counter, the envelope already half torn. Would I miss this opportunity to know more about Kara's mess? Hell nah. I slid the letter out. My eyes scanned the lines. Months of unpaid rent, complaints from the landlord, and the inevitable conclusion. Kara was being kicked out. I placed the letter back on the counter, a mix of anger and grim satisfaction simmering under the surface. This was her mess. She'd made it. But I knew how this would play out. Kara would spin this, and my parents, as always, would rush to cushion her fall. When Kara arrived that evening, her bag slung over her shoulder, she moved through the house with her usual air of indifference. She barely greeted me as she dropped her things on the kitchen counter and helped herself to a cup of coffee. The eviction notice was still where I'd left it, its presence screaming in the silence of the room. I waited. She saw the envelope, paused, and then, without hesitation, ripped it open. Her eyes flicked over the letter, and her face barely changed. She let out a frustrated sigh, tossed the paper onto the counter, and grabbed her cup as if nothing had happened. It was her usual tactic. Ignore the storm until someone else cleaned it up. My parents came in shortly after, their voices cheerful until they saw Kara's expression. My mom picked up the letter, her hand trembling slightly as she read it. My dad hovered over her shoulder, his face tightening as he absorbed the words. They didn't say much. My mom placed a hand on Kara's arm, murmuring something comforting, while my dad stared at the letter with a clenched jaw. The energy in the room shifted as they quickly fell into their usual roles. Kara the victim, my parents the saviors. I stood in the corner, watching the whole charade play out, my fists clenching at my sides. Within days, Kara's bags were back in her old room. The move was seamless, orchestrated by my parents with a quiet efficiency that made my stomach churn. They didn't even mention the eviction to me, like it was some unspoken agreement that I didn't need to know. But the truth had already started to unravel. The final piece came when I overheard my parents talking in hushed voices late one night. The words child and Greg cut through the walls like a knife. My stomach dropped as I realized they knew. They'd known all along. About the child. About Greg. About everything. And they hadn't told me. They only used me. The next morning, I made my move. Quietly, carefully, I gathered every piece of evidence I had. Venmo transactions, screenshots of Kara's Instagram, showing her frivolous lifestyle, notes on every excuse she'd ever given me. And then I made a call to her landlord. The woman on the other end was polite but firm, clearly frustrated with Kara's antics. She listened carefully as I explained what I knew, that Kara had been funneling money elsewhere while ignoring her rent. The landlord thanked me, her tone shifting as she realized the depth of Kara's deception. Kara's landlord wasted no time filing a formal complaint, tightening the screws on the eviction process. Kara's reaction was predictable, storming around the house, slamming doors, muttering about how unfair it all was. My parents rallied around her, offering comfort and excuses, their focus solely on Kara while ignoring the chaos she'd left behind. I stayed out of their way, my silence a pointed reminder that I wasn't playing along this time. When my mom finally cornered me, asking for help to get Kara back on her feet, I just shook my head and walked away. The last time I saw Kara, she was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. My parents hovered nearby, discussing plans to help her find a new apartment, offering to cover her expenses until she got back on track. I packed my things that day, leaving the house with a clear conscience. Let them deal with the fallout. Let Kara learn what happens when her lies finally catch up to her. For the first time, I felt no guilt as I walked away. She'd burned every bridge, and I wasn't about to rebuild them for her. This time, she was on her own. I don't know what the future holds. I will probably post for you one final update to let you know if things settle or worsen. Final update. Hey, it's Alex again. I figured I owed you all one last update since things have finally settled. It went exactly how I expected. After the eviction notice and everything that followed, Kara moved back in with my parents. They acted like it was some heroic act of selflessness, even though it was the most predictable outcome ever. My mom and dad immediately fell into damage control mode, bending over backward to make sure their golden child was comfortable. They cleaned out her old room, stocked the fridge with all her favorites, and even took time off work to help her adjust. Meanwhile, Kara acted like she was doing them a favor by being there. Not once did she acknowledge the mess she'd made, or the lies that got her there. As for Greg, he kept up his nonsense. Apparently, he's been threatening legal action for custody of the child, but Kara's handling it the same way she handles everything, with avoidance and denial. My parents, of course, believe every word she says about how Greg's just trying to make her life miserable. Funny how they never stopped to ask why she kept any of this a secret in the first place. My parents did try to drag me back into it, though. My mom called me a week after Kara moved in, her voice full of forced optimism. "We're all pulling together to help Kara," she said, like it was some noble crusade. "We could really use your support, Alex." "Support?" I said, trying not to laugh. "You mean money?" There was a long pause before she admitted it. "She just needs a little help getting back on her feet." "You're doing so well, Alex. And it's what family does." "Family?" I said. "You mean the family she lied to? The family she manipulated for years while spending my money on Greg and God knows what else?" "Alex, she's your sister," my mom said, her voice taking on that disappointed tone she always uses when she doesn't get her way. "She's trying." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "She's not, and I'm not bailing her out again." I hung up before she could guilt me further. Now, weeks later, I've stepped back completely. I haven't been to the house, haven't answered their calls, haven't engaged in their drama. Kara's still living there, still letting my parents handle her problems while she does the bare minimum to stay afloat. The difference is, I'm no longer part of it. For the first time in years, I feel free. No more guilt, no more enabling, no more being dragged into messes I didn't create. I'm focusing on myself, my school, my jobs, my future. I don't know if Kara will ever change. Honestly, I doubt it. My parents will probably keep enabling her until she's 40, and still blaming everyone else for her problems. But that's not my problem anymore. Thanks for sticking with me through this mess. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away. even if it's from family. Take care, everyone. Alex. This story is titled, Stepdaughter Said That I'm Not Her Real Mom and Shouldn't Tell Her What to Do. You're nothing to me. You're a nobody. So when it came time to pay for college, I told her to let her real mother pay for her tuition. Hi, everyone. Before we dive in, a quick favor. If you enjoy content like this, please hit the subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and make sure you never miss out on amazing videos. All right, let's get started. Hey, Reddit. So here's my story. I don't know why I stayed so long or why I let things get so bad, but looking back now, it feels like I was blind to all the red flags. My name's Lauren. I'm 46, and I own a bakery in Philadelphia. It's my pride and joy, something I built up from scratch with a lot of sweat and long nights. It's small, but successful, and I've always worked hard to make it a welcoming spot for the neighborhood. About 7 years ago, I met Greg. He was this contractor I hired to renovate the bakery when I was trying to expand. Right from the start, he had this way of making you feel like you could trust him. He wasn't bad looking either. Tall, dark hair, nice smile. He'd always take the time to chat with me when he was on a break, telling me about his life. He had this way of making it sound like he'd been through a lot, but was working hard to overcome it, you know? He talked about his daughter, Chloe, who was 11 at the time. He said she was his whole world, and that he'd been raising her on his own after his ex-wife, Nina, lost custody. According to him, Nina was irresponsible and caused a lot of chaos in their lives. So Greg had stepped up as the solid parent. He made it sound like he was some kind of superhero dad. And honestly, I ate it up. I thought, wow, what a good guy, taking care of his kid like that. Within a year, we were talking about marriage. Greg had this way of making everything sound like we were building a life together. He'd say things like, Chloe and I would love to have a real family again. And I guess I let myself believe that I could give them that. It wasn't just about Greg. It was Chloe too. She was shy at first, but sweet in her own way. I wanted to give her a stable, happy home, something I didn't really have growing up. So, we got married. Greg and Chloe moved into my house, which was bigger and closer to better schools for her. At first, it was great. We did family dinners, game nights, and weekend outings. Chloe seemed to be warming up to me. And Greg? Well, he seemed perfect. He'd help around the house, tell me how much he appreciated me, and remind me that we were building a future together. But looking back, the cracks started showing pretty early on. 4 years after we got married, Greg told me he was leaving his contracting job. He said the management was toxic and that he couldn't stand the way they treated him. I was sympathetic at first. I mean, everyone deserves to work somewhere they feel respected, right? He said he just needed a little time to figure out his next step, and I didn't question it. Chloe, on the other hand, seemed to be adjusting well to her new school and neighborhood. She was making friends, joining clubs, and even started talking about college plans. One day, she came home from school and said she needed a $200 calculator for some advanced math class. I told her I'd look into it, but before I could even finish the sentence, she snapped, "What's there to look into? I need it." Greg, who was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone, chimed in with, "Just get it for her, Lauren. It's for school." Like, excuse me? I'm already paying for everything, and you're just going to sit there and tell me what to do with my money? I should have said something then. I should have set boundaries, but I didn't. I wanted to keep the peace. I told myself, this is what families do. You support each other. So I bought the damn calculator and pretended it didn't bother me. But deep down, I was starting to feel like I was being taken advantage of. The thing that really got to me was how Greg talked about our future while doing absolutely nothing to contribute to it. He'd sit there with his coffee, telling me about these grand plans to start his own business. Once I get it up and running, Lauren, you'll see. I'll make sure you don't have to work so hard anymore. It sounded great in theory, but there was zero follow-through. He didn't even have a business plan. It was all talk. Okay. At first, I tried to be understanding of Greg quitting his job. Everyone hits rough patches, right? But I wasn't expecting his rough patch to turn into a full-on freeloading lifestyle. But weeks turned into months, and the man did absolutely nothing. I'd come home from 12-hour days at the bakery to find him sprawled out on the couch, eating chips and watching reruns of old cop shows. He didn't even bother to change out of his sweats most days. Meanwhile, the groceries he promised to pick up tomorrow were still not bought. The sink was full of dishes, and the trash was overflowing. "Hey, Greg," I'd ask, trying not to sound too annoyed. "Did you send out any job applications today?" "Not yet," he'd say, eyes glued to the TV. "I'm still working on my portfolio. You know, for the freelance gigs I'm planning." Oh, the freelance gigs. Let me tell you about those. Apparently, Greg's big plan was to start some kind of home renovation consulting business. He talked a lot about pivoting his skills and being his own boss. Sounds impressive, right? Except he never actually took any steps toward making it happen. No website, no business cards, no marketing, nothing. One time, I even offered to help him set up an Instagram account to showcase his work. I thought maybe if he had a platform, he could attract clients. But he just shrugged and said, "I'll get to it later. Social media is not my thing." Like, dude, it's 2023. If you're trying to start a business, you need some kind of online presence. While Greg was busy planning his imaginary empire, I was footing the bill for literally everything. Mortgage, Mr. Utilities, Mr. Groceries, you guessed it, me. Chloe's school expenses, oh yeah, also me. And let's not forget Greg's little hobbies. He started getting into woodworking as a stress reliever, which meant I was buying him expensive tools and supplies that sat untouched in the garage. One day, I came home from the bakery and found a $400 saw sitting in the living room. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the receipt. "Oh, that's for my new project," Greg said, not even looking up from his laptop. "I'm going to build a custom coffee table for the living room." "Greg, we already have a coffee table," I pointed out. "Yeah, but it's not personal, you know? I want something that represents us." The coffee table never got built. The saw stayed in the box for weeks, until I eventually shoved it into the garage to get it out of sight. Meanwhile, Chloe was catching on to her dad's vibe and started acting like the world owed her too. Every time she wanted something, she'd just assume I'd buy it for her. She didn't even bother asking Greg because, let's be real, he was just as broke as she was. "Lauren," she said one evening, sliding her laptop across the table toward me, "I need this jacket for school. It's for the senior trip." The jacket was $250. A jacket for one trip. "Chloe, that's really expensive," I said. "Can't we find something similar that's a little cheaper?" She rolled her eyes so hard, I thought they might fall out of her head. "It's mandatory," she said, like I was being unreasonable. "Everyone else is getting one." Before I could say anything, Greg chimed in from the couch. "Just get it for her, Lauren. It's not that big of a deal." Like an idiot, I caved. I swiped my card, told myself it wasn't worth the argument, and tried to move on. But it didn't stop there. Oh no. Chloe started treating me like her personal ATM. Need money for a field trip? Ask Lauren. Want the newest iPhone? Lauren will pay for it. She didn't even say thank you most of the time. It was just expected. One day I overheard her talking to one of her friends on the phone. "Yeah, my stepmom's loaded," she said, laughing. "She doesn't even care how much stuff costs." I just stood there, stunned. Is that what she thought? That I didn't care? That I was just some endless source of money? Greg wasn't any better. He started making these little comments that rubbed me the wrong way. Like, if I ever complained about how busy I was at the bakery, he'd say, "Well, at least you're making good money." Or if I brought up the bills, he'd go, "You're doing fine, Lauren. Why stress about it?" Why stress? Because I was paying for 3 people on one income, Greg. That's why. One night, after a particularly long day, I decided to sit Greg down for a serious talk. "Listen," I said, "I'm happy to help while you're figuring things out, but this can't go on forever. You need to start contributing, Greg. We're supposed to be a team." He looked at me like I'd just told him to walk to Mars. "I am contributing," he said. "I help around the house, don't I? I take care of Chloe." "Greg," I said, trying to keep my cool. "Helping around the house isn't the same as paying bills, and Chloe's almost 18. She doesn't need a babysitter." He sighed like he was the one being inconvenienced. "Lauren, I just need more time. You've got the bakery. It's not like we're struggling." That was the moment I realized Greg didn't see me as a partner. He saw me as a provider, someone who would keep everything running while he coasted through life. I decided to give him one last chance. "Okay," I said, "but you need to have a concrete plan by the end of the month. No more excuses." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't taking me seriously. And surprise, the end of the month came and went with no plan, no job, and no change. I started feeling trapped, like I was carrying the weight of the entire household on my back while Greg and Chloe just sat there, taking advantage of me. I loved my bakery, but it felt like all the joy was being sucked out of my life because I was working so hard to support 2 people who didn't appreciate me. When I look back, I should have put my foot down sooner. But at the time, I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that Greg would snap out of it, that Chloe would grow up and start acting responsibly. I wanted so badly for us to be a happy family that I ignored all the signs that it wasn't working. But things were about to get a whole lot worse. By the time Chloe's 18th birthday rolled around, I was so desperate to keep the peace in our house that I didn't even realize how much I was bending over backward for people who didn't give a damn about me. Chloe had been dropping hints for months about how her birthday needed to be epic because it was the big one. You know, turning 18 and all. She wanted it to be the kind of party her friends would talk about for weeks. "Lauren, can we have the party at the bakery?" she asked one evening while scrolling on her phone. It's like super cool, and my friends are always saying how classy it looks. Classy? Sure, but classy doesn't come cheap. I hesitated for a moment, knowing full well this would cost me more than I was comfortable spending. Before I could even answer, Greg chimed in, "Come on, Lauren. It's her big day. Let's make it special." This man, who still hadn't lifted a finger to contribute financially, was pushing me to throw an extravagant party? But like a sucker, I agreed. I told myself it was for Chloe, not Greg, and that maybe this would help us bond more. Big mistake. I went all out for the party. I closed the bakery for the evening, hired a local band to play live music, and ordered these gorgeous custom cupcakes with edible gold accents. I even let Chloe pick out the decorations, which included some ridiculous balloon arch that cost nearly $500. But hey, I wanted her to feel special. In the days leading up to the party, Chloe was buzzing with excitement. She kept talking about how her friends were going to love it and how it was going to be the best night ever. I asked her for a guest list so I could plan accordingly, but she kept brushing me off. "Don't worry about it, Lauren," she'd say. "It's just a small group of friends." I should have known better. The night of the party, I showed up early to make sure everything was perfect. The bakery looked stunning, and I was actually kind of proud of what I'd pulled off. Chloe arrived about an hour later, dressed to the nines in a designer dress I had bought her. She looked amazing, and I could tell she felt like a queen. Her friends started trickling in, and soon the place was packed, not just with her classmates, but also with random people I'd never even heard of. It was chaos. Kids were running around, snapping selfies, and blasting music louder than I was comfortable with. But Chloe looked happy, and I figured that was the point. Then, just as I was starting to relax, she walked in. Nina, Chloe's mom. I knew it was her the second I saw her. She had this air of entitlement, like she owned the place. She was wearing this gaudy outfit that didn't match the vibe of the party at all, and her lipstick was smeared like she hadn't checked a mirror all night. She walked right up to Chloe, arms wide open, and yelled, "There's my baby girl!" Chloe froze for a second, glancing nervously at me, but then she hugged her mom like nothing was wrong. "Mom, you made it," she said, smiling. Made it? I hadn't invited her. I didn't even know Chloe had invited her. But there she was, acting like she belonged. I tried to keep my cool, but my heart was racing. I walked over to Greg, who was standing in the corner sipping a soda like he was a guest at someone else's party. "Greg," I said quietly, "did you know Nina was coming?" He looked at me like I'd just asked him if the sky was blue. "Of course I did," he said. "Chloe told me she wanted her mom here. I didn't think it'd be a big deal." Not a big deal? The woman hadn't shown up sober to a single event in years, and now she was at my bakery, crashing a party I paid for? I was furious, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Not yet. I tried to avoid Nina, but she made that impossible. She was everywhere, hugging Chloe, chatting with her friends, and loudly telling stories about how she used to throw parties just like this when Chloe was a kid. It was infuriating. Then, as if she hadn't already made her presence loud enough, she walked up to my table where I was sitting with Greg and Chloe and said, "This is my spot. Move." I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "Excuse me?" I replied. "This is my daughter's party," she snapped. "I'm her mother. I should be sitting next to her, not you." I looked at Greg, hoping he'd step in, but as usual, he just stared at his drink like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Chloe, who was sitting next to us, didn't say a word either. She just looked down at her phone, pretending not to notice. "I'm not moving," I said firmly. "There are plenty of empty seats. Feel free to pick one." Nina's face turned red. "Oh, look at you," she sneered. "The big bad stepmom who thinks she can replace me. Guess what? Money can't buy love." Before I could respond, she grabbed a plate of food off the table and hurled it onto the floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the room, and everyone stopped talking. It was dead silent. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You're not welcome here." Nina laughed like I'd told a joke. "Oh, you think you can kick me out? You're nothing, Lauren. Nothing." I signaled to the bakery's security staff. Yes, I had security, because I wasn't stupid enough to think a party full of teenagers wouldn't need supervision. They escorted Nina out while she screamed and caused a scene in front of all the guests. Chloe looked mortified. And Greg? He still didn't say a damn word. After Nina was gone, the party felt tense. Chloe tried to play it off, but you could tell her friends were uncomfortable. The whispers started. "Did you see her mom? I can't believe that just happened." People left early, and Chloe barely spoke to me for the rest of the night. When we got home, I tried to talk to her. "Chloe, I'm sorry about what happened tonight, but..." She cut me off. "This wouldn't have happened if you just let her sit with us. You made it worse." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything I'd done to make her birthday special, She was blaming me for her mom's behavior? I looked at Greg, hoping for backup, but he just muttered, "Let's talk about this tomorrow." After the disaster that was Chloe's birthday, you'd think Greg might have stepped up and at least tried to show some appreciation or support. Nope. Instead, he doubled down on being the most entitled, lazy, and delusional person I've ever met. By this point, I wasn't even angry. I was just exhausted. Mentally, emotionally, financially, exhausted. Things hit a new low when Greg decided he was going to help out by taking over some of the household chores. At first, I thought, finally, he's doing something. But of course, it didn't last. For about a week, he'd occasionally do the dishes or vacuum the living room, but then he started complaining about how draining it was. "This is a lot of work," he said one evening, as he tossed a load of laundry onto the couch. "I don't know how you expect me to do all this and focus on my business." I stared at him, dumbfounded. "Greg, I've been doing all of this and running a business for years." "What are you talking about?" He shrugged. "Yeah, but you're used to it. This is new for me." I couldn't even respond. What was there to say? The man was allergic to responsibility. And then there was Chloe. If Greg was a freeloading mooch, Chloe was quickly becoming his protege. She'd picked up on his attitude and ran with it. She wasn't just asking for things anymore. She was demanding them. One evening, she came downstairs and announced that she needed new furniture for her room. Not just a desk or a chair. She wanted a full makeover. New bed, new dresser, new everything. "I've outgrown all my old stuff," she said, flipping her hair like she was a Kardashian. "I need something more mature." "Chloe, we can't afford that right now," I said firmly. "Maybe we can look at updating a few things next year." Her face turned red. "You just don't want to spend money on me because I'm not your kid," she snapped. That hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd been doing my best for this girl, and she had the nerve to say I didn't care about her because she wasn't my biological daughter. I didn't even know how to respond. Greg, of course, didn't say a word. He just sat there, staring at his phone like nothing was happening. That night, I sat down with Greg and laid it all out. "You need to get a job," I said bluntly. "I don't care what it is, but you can't just sit here and expect me to do everything. It's not fair." Greg didn't take it well. "You're being selfish," he said, crossing his arms. "You don't understand how hard it is for me right now." I laughed. An actual laugh, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Hard for you? Greg, I'm the one working 12-hour days while you sit on your ass. How is that fair?" He just shook his head. "You don't get it, Lauren. You've always been about the money. You don't care about my dreams." That was it. That was the moment I realized Greg didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a bank account. Greg's true colors were in full view, and I knew things weren't going to get better. But little did I know, Chloe was about to up the stakes and push me to my breaking point. Chloe's graduation was the grand finale. By this point, I was so worn down by Greg and Chloe's entitlement that I could barely muster the energy to argue anymore. I'd become the human version of sure whatever, just going along with things to avoid yet another blow-up. But let me tell you, this one took the cake. It started a couple of weeks before Chloe's graduation ceremony. She came home one day, full of excitement, waving a letter from her school. "They're giving me an award at graduation," she announced, practically skipping into the kitchen. "That's great, Chloe," I said, genuinely happy for her. "What's the award for? Something about leadership or community service?" "I don't know," she shrugged, already texting someone on her phone. "But the important thing is, I get to go on stage." I smiled and congratulated her, even though it bugged me a little that she didn't even know what the award was for. Still, I figured this was a proud moment for her, and I wanted to support her. What I didn't realize was how quickly things were about to spiral out of control. The first sign of trouble came when Chloe announced that she wanted to have a big graduation party at the house. "We'll keep it simple," she said, which I now know is Chloe speak for start prepping your wallet. When I asked her how many people she wanted to invite, she casually said, "Oh, like 50, maybe 60. "Chloe, 60 people?" I said, my eyes practically popping out of my head. "Where are we even going to fit that many people?" "We'll do it in the backyard," she replied, like it was no big deal. "Just rent some tables and chairs, and maybe a tent. It'll be fine." Fine? I was still recovering from the disaster of her birthday party, and now she wanted me to host an even bigger event? I glanced at Greg, hoping he'd step in and suggest something more reasonable. Of course, he didn't. "She's only graduating once," he said with a shrug. "We should make it special." I gritted my teeth but agreed to the party. As the graduation ceremony got closer, Chloe's demands started piling up. She needed a new dress for the event. "Nothing cheap, Lauren? This is a big deal." New shoes to match the dress, professional hair and makeup, and of course, a custom cake for the party. By the time I finished paying for everything, I was out hundreds of dollars. Not once did Greg or Chloe even offer to chip in. On the morning of the ceremony, Chloe came downstairs wearing her brand new dress, looking like $1,000,000. She glanced at me and said, "Don't forget to bring flowers for after the ceremony. It'll look weird if I don't get any." It'll look weird? Not, "Hey Lauren, could you please bring flowers?" No, it was just expected that I'd show up with a bouquet like some personal assistant. I bit my tongue, grabbed my keys, and ran out to pick up flowers before we headed to the school. By the time we got there, I was already exhausted, but I plastered on a smile and tried to focus on Chloe's big moment. The ceremony itself was fine. Chloe got her award, walked across the stage, and beamed at the applause. For a split second, I thought, okay, maybe this will be worth it. Maybe she'll realize how much I care and start treating me better. After the ceremony, we met her outside to take pictures. Greg handed her the bouquet I'd bought, taking all the credit, of course. "Your stepmom picked these up," he said, like it was some minor afterthought. Chloe barely glanced at me. "Oh, thanks, I guess." Thanks, I guess? I'd been running myself ragged to make this day perfect for her, and all I got was a half-hearted thanks? I swallowed my frustration and smiled for the pictures, but inside I was fuming. The real drama started at the graduation party. I'd spent all day setting up the backyard, arranging tables, hanging decorations, and making sure the food was perfect. By the time the guests started arriving, I was running on fumes. Chloe, on the other hand, was in full party mode, laughing with her friends and posing for pictures like a celebrity. Greg, as usual, was nowhere to be found, probably hiding inside, scrolling on his phone. About an hour into the party, Chloe came up to me and said, "Mom's coming over." I froze. "What do you mean, Mom's coming over?" "She wants to congratulate me," Chloe said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I told her to stop by. "Chloe," I said, trying to stay calm, "after what happened at your birthday, I don't think it's a good idea for Nina to come here." Chloe rolled her eyes. "That was your fault, Lauren. If you hadn't been so rude to her, none of that would have happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Chloe, she caused a scene, insulted me, and destroyed property. How is that my fault?" "You just don't get it," Chloe snapped. "She's my real mom, and she's part of my life whether you like it or not." I turned to Greg, hoping he'd back me up. Instead, he shrugged and said, "Let's not make a big deal out of this. It's her day." I'd spent weeks planning this party, paid for every single thing, and now I was supposed to let his ex-wife waltz in and ruin it? Absolutely not. "Nina is not coming into this house," I said firmly. End of discussion. That was all Chloe needed to lose it. "You're not my mom," she screamed, loud enough for the entire party to hear. "You're nobody. Who do you think you are, telling me what to do?" The party went dead silent. I could feel everyone staring at me, waiting to see how I'd react. Greg just stood there, staring at the ground like a coward. "I'm the person who paid for this entire party," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm the person who's been supporting you for years, while your father sits on his ass. And if you can't respect me in my own home, you can leave." Chloe's face turned red with anger. "Fine! I don't want to be here anyway." She stormed off, dragging a group of her friends with her. The rest of the party fizzled out after that. Guests made awkward excuses and left, leaving me alone in a backyard full of half-eaten food and overturned chairs. Greg finally came outside, but instead of apologizing, he blamed me. "You didn't have to escalate things," he said. "You could have just let her have this one day." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Greg, she humiliated me in front of everyone and you did nothing." Again, he shook his head and walked back inside, leaving me to clean up the mess. A few weeks after Chloe's graduation fiasco, things in the house were tense, to say the least. Chloe barely spoke to me, which honestly was a bit of a relief. When she did, it was usually to complain or throw in a passive-aggressive comment about how I ruined her party. Greg wasn't much better. If he wasn't completely ignoring me, he was muttering things under his breath about how I needed to be more understanding. But the real storm hit when Chloe got the letter she'd been waiting for, her acceptance to NYU. She came bursting into the house one afternoon, waving the envelope around like she'd just won the lottery. "Lauren, Dad, I got in!" she screamed, practically jumping up and down. "That's great news," I said, genuinely happy for her. I figured, after all the drama, maybe this could be a turning point. Maybe she'd start taking responsibility and working toward her future. Silly me. Greg hugged her, grinning like a proud father. "I knew you could do it, kiddo." Chloe turned to me with that all-too-familiar smirk. "So, Lauren, when can we talk about tuition?" The room went quiet. I blinked at her, caught off guard. "Tuition?" I asked. "Chloe, NYU is expensive. Have you looked into scholarships or financial aid?" She rolled her eyes. "I got some aid, but it's not enough. I figured you'd help cover the rest? I mean, you've got the money." I looked at Greg, expecting him to step in and explain how college expenses weren't just my responsibility. Instead, he nodded like it was already a done deal. She's right, Lauren. You can afford it. That was the moment I realized they'd been planning this behind my back. Greg had probably been feeding her the idea that I'd just opened my wallet, no questions asked, like I always did. But this? Paying tens of thousands of dollars for a kid who had spent the last year treating me like garbage? No way. Chloe, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm really proud of you for getting into NYU, but I can't just write a blank check for your tuition. Have you considered getting a part-time job or looking into more scholarships? Her face turned red. A job? Are you serious? How am I supposed to focus on school if I'm working all the time? Plenty of students work while they're in college, I replied. It's a good way to build responsibility. Greg cut in before she could respond. Lauren, come on, she's just a kid. You don't want her to struggle, do you? A kid? I shot back. She's 18. And let's be real, Greg. She's old enough to know better than to expect me to cover this without even asking. Chloe crossed her arms and glared at me. You're just trying to punish me because of the graduation party. I stared at her, stunned. Punish you? Chloe, this has nothing to do with the party. This is about money. And the fact that you and your dad seem to think I'm a bottomless ATM? Greg threw up his hands. Oh, here we go again. Everything's about money with you, Lauren. Life isn't fair, Chloe muttered under her breath. I turned to her, my patience wearing thin. You're right, Chloe. Life isn't fair. But that doesn't mean you get to dump all your responsibilities on me. If you want to go to NYU, you need to figure out how to make it happen. The conversation didn't end there, of course. Chloe stormed off to her room, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. Greg sat on the couch, sulking like a teenager. For the next few days, the house was a war zone. Chloe wouldn't even look at me, and Greg kept dropping passive-aggressive comments about how I was letting the family down. One night, Greg finally decided to confront me. You're being selfish, Lauren, he said, standing in the kitchen while I washed dishes. This is her future we're talking about. I turned to face him, my hands still wet. Greg, don't you dare call me selfish. I'm just realistic. She's your stepdaughter, he said, like that was supposed to mean something. You're supposed to support her. She's only my stepdaughter when it's convenient for you, I shot back. Every other time I'm just Lauren, the woman who's not her real mom. Well, not anymore. Greg looked at me like I just slapped him. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done, I said, wiping my hands on a towel. I'm done being taken for granted. If Chloe wants to go to NYU, she can figure it out with her real mom. The next day, Chloe came downstairs with a new tactic, guilt. She sat at the table, looking teary-eyed, and said, Lauren, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. I didn't mean to make you feel unappreciated. For a split second, I almost believed her. But then she added, I just think it's really unfair that you won't help me. You've always said you wanted to give me a better future. Isn't this part of that? I sighed, sitting down across from her. Chloe, I do want you to have a good future, but I also want you to learn how to take responsibility for yourself. Life isn't about expecting other people to bail you out. She sniffled dramatically, clearly trying to turn on the waterwork. I can't believe you do this to me. You're ruining my chances at New York University. No, Chloe, I said firmly. You're ruining them by refusing to take any responsibility. You've spent months treating me like I don't matter, and now you expect me to pay for your tuition? That's not how it works. A few days later, Greg tried one last time to pressure me. Either you pay for Chloe's education, he said, his arms crossed like he was delivering an ultimatum, or I'm filing for divorce. I stared at him, completely unfazed. Okay, I said. File for divorce. He blinked, clearly not expecting that response. You don't mean that. Oh, I mean it, I said, crossing my own arms. In fact, I'll call a lawyer tomorrow. For the first time in months, Greg was speechless. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him, while I sat there feeling oddly calm. When Greg and Chloe left, I thought I'd feel a little guilty. But as I watched them pack up their things and walk out the door, the only thing I felt was relief. For the first time in years, my house was quiet, peaceful. Greg didn't make a big scene when he left, which honestly surprised me. I think he realized his usual guilt trips weren't going to work anymore. He muttered something about how I'd regret this. Chloe, on the other hand, made sure I knew exactly how she felt. This is why no one likes you, she snapped as she hauled a suitcase down the stairs. You're selfish and controlling, and you'll end up alone. I didn't even bother responding. What was the point? She'd already made it clear how little she respected me, and I wasn't about to waste my breath trying to change her mind. Instead, I stood in the doorway and watched as they loaded their stuff into Greg's car. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the prenup I'd insisted on. Greg tried to contest it, claiming he deserved a share of the bakery. My lawyer shut that down fast. I heard bits and pieces about them through mutual friends. Apparently, they were living in a tiny apartment across town. Greg was trying to restart his contracting business, but it wasn't going well. He'd burned a lot of bridges in the industry, and word had gotten around about his poor work ethic. Chloe, meanwhile, had deferred her enrollment at NYU because she couldn't afford the tuition. She was working at a mall, complaining to anyone who would listen about how unfair her life was. One day, I got a message from Chloe. It was short and clearly written in a hurry. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether or not to respond. A part of me wanted to believe she'd finally realized how unfair she'd been, but another part of me knew better. Chloe wasn't reaching out because she cared. She was reaching out because she needed something. Money, most likely. I decided not to respond. I wasn't interested in reopening that door. A few weeks later, Greg tried his luck. He called me one evening while I was at the bakery, working on plans for the grand opening of the second location. "Hey, Lauren," he said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "I just wanted to check in. How are you doing?" I almost laughed. "What do you want, Greg?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. There was a long pause before he finally admitted why he was calling. "I was wondering if you'd be willing to help Chloe out. She's really struggling right now, and I know you care about her deep down." I felt my blood boil. "Greg, let me make this clear. Chloe is not my responsibility. I'm done. If she's struggling, that's on you. And her." He tried to argue, but I wasn't having it. "Goodbye, Greg," I said, hanging up before he could say another word. That was the last time I heard from them. And here, my story ends. Thanks for reading, Redditors. And remember, never let anyone take advantage of your kindness. You deserve better.
I got married at 23 to my ex-husband, who was 28. Our marriage lasted a year and 5 months before we decided to go our separate ways. It was a mutual decision because we couldn't imagine spending the rest of our lives together. We were constantly fighting and couldn't even be in the same room without arguing. So getting a divorce was the best option. My parents were supportive because they knew not to meddle in my life. However, my mother-in-law wasn't as understanding. She believed that divorce meant giving up on the marriage and thought we should always keep trying to make it work. She never left my father-in-law despite his multiple affairs. I didn't share her views and tried to explain this to her as gently as possible since she had always been kind to me during my marriage. I felt worse about breaking her heart than about the divorce itself. The divorce was finalized about 2 years ago, and that was the last time I heard from or spoke to my ex-husband. I moved to a different part of the city for work, and we didn't stay in touch. We didn't have many mutual friends, just a couple we were close to from our first internship. I haven't kept up with him, and assumed he hasn't kept up with me either. We didn't even follow each other on social media. We didn't hate each other. We were civil but had enough of each other by the end. After my divorce, I thought I'd stay single for a while, but then I met my current partner, my fiancé. We've been together for about a year, and he didn't mind that I started dating him just 7 months after my divorce. My ex and I had been mentally separated for a long time. The legal process just made it seem longer. My fiancé knew about my past and didn't care that I'd been married before, but his mother was a bit more uptight about it when I first met her 6 months into our relationship. She was poly, but closed off and didn't warm up to me despite meeting me a few more times. So I decided to just go with the flow. If she eventually liked me, great. If not, at least I tried. Then came the pregnancy. My fiancé and I found out I was pregnant 4 weeks in, and I decided to keep the baby. He was thrilled, even though we'd only been together for a short while and weren't married. None of that mattered to him. He knew deep down that I was the one for him, and I felt the same way. We didn't rush into marriage because I didn't want another wedding so soon. My fiancé respected my feelings, especially since my emotions and hormones were all over the place during the pregnancy. I didn't want to agree to something and then regret it later. I might feel differently about marriage once the baby is born. I didn't think it was a good idea to jump from one marriage to another. I wanted to make things work with my fiancé during and after the pregnancy, to see how we'd handle situations. Only then would I be ready for a second marriage. I felt I was being rational and reasonable, and my fiancé agreed with me. However, his mother thought I was being too dramatic and insisted we get married before the baby arrived. She believed that babies born outside of marriage are illegitimate and called them a certain word I won't repeat because I dislike it. I didn't agree with her at all, but chose not to argue because it didn't seem worth it. Neither my fiancé nor I cared about her opinion as long as we were okay with our plans. During the 7th month of my pregnancy, my fiancé proposed, and I said yes immediately. I knew he was the right man for me. I had never felt that way with my ex, so I knew this was real. Marriage could wait, but we were at least engaged. His mother wasn't happy, but there was nothing we could do about that, and we didn't want to fix it. She had been sour throughout the pregnancy and ruined my vibe every time she visited us to see the baby. Every time she'd visit, she'd wait for my fiancé to leave the room before lecturing me on the importance of marriage before having a child. She even read articles to support her point. I just had to nod along and pretend to care. Then, almost a week ago, I went into labor and was rushed to the hospital by my parents because my fiancé was at work. My parents had been coming over to look after me as I was close to my due date. My mother-in-law had volunteered to be with me, but I'd rather be alone than with her. My fiancé came to the hospital as soon as he could, and so did his parents. Everyone I expected was there within an hour, but then my ex-mother-in-law suddenly barged into the room. We had a private birthing suite, and only 2 people were allowed in the room at once, and just one during delivery. I chose my fiancé and my mom to stay with me. My ex-mother-in-law, however, forced her way past the hospital staff and my family, declaring that the baby I was giving birth to was her son's. I hadn't seen her son, my ex, in 2 years since our divorce. She had to be dragged out by 2 male nurses while she screamed at me to admit I'd been cheating on my fiancé. Her outburst was loud enough for the entire hospital to hear. My fiancé was shocked but tried not to let it affect him. His mother, however, became outraged and stormed into the room, demanding my mother leave so she could talk to me. When my mother refused, she started arguing with her right there. During labor, I was in so much pain that I didn't care about anyone else's feelings. When my boyfriend's mom started causing a scene, I yelled at her to get out, or I have security remove her. I had been trying to stay calm throughout my pregnancy, but the labor pain was too much, and I finally lost my cool. Even the nurse was surprised by my outburst, as she had been trying to get my boyfriend's mom out of the room for 3 minutes while she argued with my mom. After my outburst, she finally left, and I focused on delivering my baby. A couple of hours later, I gave birth to my son. I didn't want to think about my ex-mother-in-law, so I told everyone but my fiancé to go home and that I'd meet them later. It was past midnight by then, and my fiancé was incredibly supportive, staying with me and taking care of me throughout the night. The next day, when we got home, I told my fiancé I didn't want to see his mother for a few days. He seemed surprised, thinking she liked me, but he assured me he'd keep her away until I was ready. After being discharged, it was time to talk to my ex and understand what his mother had been up to. With my fiancé by my side, I called my ex. He answered, likely expecting my call. He explained that he had been seeing someone with a similar name to mine and had been keeping it a secret from his mother. My ex had been avoiding introducing his new girlfriend to his mom because she kept pestering him about getting married and having kids. His mom mistakenly assumed that he and I had gotten back together after she overheard him talking to his girlfriend on the phone. Our names sound similar, so she thought he was talking to me. Since then, she had been asking about me, and my ex let her believe we were together to stop her constant nagging about marriage and kids. He even told her I needed time to adjust and that it would be best if she stayed away from me for a while, which is why she hadn't contacted me. Unfortunately, that day at the hospital, my ex's aunt was also there for a checkup. I've only seen her a few times, but since she and my ex's mom are close, she also believed I was back with my ex. When she saw me, heavily pregnant, being rushed to the birthing suites with another man and 2 families, she immediately informed my ex's mom. That's how she ended up barging into my room. I couldn't press charges because I was busy delivering a baby, but thankfully, she was thrown out of the hospital. She went home, confronted my ex about what she saw, and finally learned the truth. However, neither of them had the courage to call and tell me any of this, waiting for me to contact them first. So I could ask, and they'd finally tell me what had happened. It was ridiculous and very irresponsible of my ex and his mother. I had half a mind to file a restraining order against both of them because it was crazy and could have gone south very easily. He apologized and told me they were moving out of the state so he could live with his new girlfriend. Anyway, I have nothing to worry about now. My fiancé was also really annoyed by all of this. After the phone call, he told me he'd been really concerned and confused when my ex-mother-in-law had barged in like that, but he trusted his gut because he knew I'd never do that to him. So he kept quiet throughout and held it together for my sake because I was giving birth to his baby then, and that's all that mattered. It was really sweet of him, and I'm grateful that I have such a trusting and kind man as my fiancé. Once we knew the truth, we told our families about it as well. Of course, we expected them to be okay with all of it, but my fiancé's mother was far from okay. She wanted her son to get a paternity test done at the earliest and refused to change her mind, even after she learned the truth. I was okay with the idea and didn't care because it would just show her what an idiot she was being. But my fiancé put his foot down and told her he was going to do no such thing because he trusted me completely. His mother had been trying to get him to get a paternity test right from the time the whole fiasco with my ex-mother-in-law took place. But my fiancé wasn't on board with that. I found it a little strange that he was refusing to get that test done, because if I was in his place, I might have thought the same. So I asked him why he wasn't okay with the idea. He told me that his entire life he'd always done exactly what his mother had asked him to, but now he was tired of being her puppet all the time. He didn't want to constantly dance to her tunes and do what she wanted him to do. Now that he had more people to worry about, it wasn't as much about the test as it was about his own self and his relationship with his mother. So essentially, the real reason he refused to get the test done was that he didn't want to give his mother the satisfaction of knowing she'd pushed him into doubting me somehow. I respected that it was pointless anyway because I hadn't been with anyone else after my fiancé, and it literally couldn't have been anyone else's baby but his. For a week, my fiancé has been fighting with his mother over this, and both of them are as stubborn as the other. I want to suggest they go no contact, but my fiancé told me he doesn't want to lose his dad as well since the poor old man has always counted on him to visit and keep in touch. His mother isn't the easiest person to live with. His dad, older than his mom, finds it difficult to stand up for himself the way he used to. It takes a toll on him mentally, so he mostly relies on my fiancé now. His dad always stood up for him when he was younger and made sure he didn't have to follow all this mother's ridiculous rules, giving him some freedom at least. My fiancé visits his parents almost every other weekend, and I really like that about him because I get along with his dad. I can see where he's coming from. His dad also cannot leave his mother because they've been together for over 3 decades, and he loves her too much to actually leave. Going no contact isn't a viable option for us right now, but at the rate things are going, there might not be any other way out for him. His mom hadn't spoken to me directly so far, but yesterday she called me and told me I needed to get that paternity test done ASAP, or else she'd go no contact with us instead. She threatened that she'd never let my fiancé set foot in her house again if I didn't get the test done. In the heat of the moment, I told her I'd wish she'd cut us both off as soon as she can because I'm sick of her nagging. I was really tired because having a baby isn't easy, and despite all the help from my fiancé and parents, I was still emotionally and physically exhausted. She wasn't helping the situation by acting this way, so I went ahead and said whatever came to me first. She hasn't contacted me since. She hasn't spoken to my fiancé either, and I'm afraid I might have messed up by reacting the way I did. If she does cut us off, I don't think my fiancé will be very happy about it because of his relationship with his dad. It's not my place to interfere there, but to be fair, she's the one who involved me by calling me up in the first place, so it's not my fault. I'm just confused about what to do with this. So to be very honest, am I the asshole for telling my future mother-in-law that she can cut me and my fiancé off if she wants to because she kept pushing us to get a paternity test over a misunderstanding? Update 1. I read through the comments on the post and immediately told my fiancé about what happened. You guys were right. I should have told him about the call as soon as it happened, but I was too tired for an emotional confrontation at the time. Of course, I couldn't keep this a secret, and it wasn't worth it either, so I told him everything. He was furious, not at me, but at his mother for dragging me into this. It's pretty messed up because I had a baby just over a week ago, and despite that, she didn't see anything wrong with calling me and threatening to cut us off just to stress me out. My fiancé trusts me, and that should be enough for her. I don't even know why she's so worked up about this whole thing, but there's usually no explanation for her actions. She's just a crazy control freak who wants everything to go her way without any concern for others' feelings or thoughts. Instead of wasting time arguing with his mother, my fiancé decided to talk to his dad instead. The only reason his dad hasn't left yet is because of his age and because he thinks he loves her. In my opinion, he's just used to her presence and mistakes that for love. Even if he does love her, she most definitely doesn't. Her idea of love is bossing people around and having 100% control over their lives. That's not love, and I don't think she understands that. I'm glad someone like that won't be a part of my life anymore. More importantly, she won't be part of my baby's life. My fiancé is currently at his parents' house, trying to convince his dad to leave his mother so he can finally say goodbye to her before we get married. The last thing we need is her trying to micromanage our wedding and then our married life. I'll keep you guys in the loop about whatever happens. Update 2. Hey, so yesterday my fiancé went over to his parents' place to talk some sense into his dad and get him to finally leave his mother. He was there for about 5 hours, and when he finally came back home, his dad was with him with his bags. It was really late, so I didn't post an update. Today I have some time because my mom is taking care of the baby. My fiancé was able to talk to his father yesterday only because his mother mistakenly let him in. She thought he was there to apologize and say he had dumped me. Instead, he stood his ground and spoke to his dad, urging him to leave. She didn't call the cops because she was too worried about her image and reputation among her friends. The most she could do was scream to drown out his voice. His father was conflicted and unsure of what to do, but gradually my fiancé got through to him. He realized he couldn't stay with his wife anymore. Their marriage had been over for a long time, but he hadn't seen it because he was so in love with her. Sadly, those feelings weren't mutual. She just wanted to control them, mistaking it for love. My future father-in-law finally decided to leave, leading to a huge fight with his wife. After a long verbal argument, he gave up and started packing his bags while she continued to shout and threaten that she'd never take him back. It didn't matter, though. He had made up his mind. Once his bags were packed, she let them leave, slamming the door hard after they were gone. Now his father is living with us, along with my parents. It's a bit crowded, but I love it because I've always wanted a big family. They all help with the baby and chores, so I have no complaints. I'm being treated like a princess now. Unfortunately, my mother-in-law won't see or be a part of this due to her stubbornness. It sucks to be her, but she can't help it. Here's a short update. It's been almost a month since my fiancé and I got married. We had an intimate and beautiful ceremony 2 weeks ago with close family and friends. My father-in-law is in the middle of a divorce, and my mother-in-law still isn't talking to us. However, everyone, including me, is happier without her. She thinks she's punishing us by cutting us off, but we don't care. It's just sad for her. At least my family is happy, and that's what matters. Stay tuned for more stories from Revenge Remini. I'm a 34-year-old widowed woman. During the last year of the pandemic, my husband died of COVID-19. We had 3 children together. Financially, I can manage the household on my own. The small amount of monetary help we receive from my husband's workplace goes into our savings account for any unexpected expenses. It's been almost a year since his passing, and things have become really hard for me, both emotionally and because of my children's closeness to their grandparents. I need to maintain a relationship with them, even though they have always been passive-aggressive toward me after my husband's death. They believe they have a claim over everything that belonged to my husband, which is legally incorrect. Everything that belonged to him now belongs to me and our children. My mother-in-law, 59, is more aggressive than my father-in-law. After his son's death, he changed somewhat and got really close to our 3 children. He knows that if I leave, I'll be taking the kids with me, so he doesn't cause trouble and is quite chill about it. According to my husband's will, the land and assets he inherited from his grandfather, along with other assets and cash, are to go to me after his death. We don't have a lot, but it's enough. Raising 3 kids and myself isn't easy, and half the money will go to college tuition. So, in the long term, the money and assets aren't really that much for us. Things between my mother-in-law and father-in-law were never good. I don't know how she won over his heart, but from what I understand, they got married because she was pregnant with their first child. They had a total of 4 children. Because of their strained relationship, my husband's grandpa gave his assets to his grandchildren instead. My father-in-law was unreliable, with no good paying or stable job, and he wasn't a good father or person. My mother-in-law always expected to gain a fortune through my husband. She constantly eyed the assets he inherited and those he created himself. If she had been a nicer and kinder person, I might have considered her wishes, but she was neither of those things. In fact, she never liked me or wanted me around, so I decided to keep my distance. The only reason she is kind to my children is because of her own selfish desires. The other day, when I went to pick up my kids from her home, my mother-in-law stopped me on my way back to the car. Standing on her porch, she said she needed to talk to me about something related to my husband. She kept her words straightforward, saying that because she spent money raising her son, she deserves half of the inheritance he left. She made it very clear. When I refused to discuss her claims further, she accused me of being selfish for taking everything. She then threatened me, reminding me how she helped me get a job when I was on the brink of homelessness with my kids. She said she would tell my boss to fire me and take me to court to ruin my life. She emphasized her closeness with my boss, boasting about their friendship and how easily she could get me fired. I met my boss for the first time at my husband's funeral, as she is a close family friend. Knowing I had no job and that my in-laws wouldn't support me, she hired me as her secretary. I love my job and work hard to ensure I never give them a reason to fire me. Her threat to get me fired scared me because finding a job isn't easy. If I lose this one, it will hit me pretty hard. Everything just makes me stressed out. After hearing this, it really hurt me. I excused myself and asked her to talk to me through my lawyer. I don't know what will happen, but all I can do is pray and hope for the best. Hey everyone, I read all the comments and didn't expect this to blow up like it did. Thanks for all the upvotes. After everything happened, I contacted my lawyer and asked him what to do. He told me not to worry because I have a job contract that states I can't be fired before 2 years unless I break the rules of the firm. He suggested I explain the whole situation to my boss and bring her to our side. If my mother-in-law starts any trouble, we can charge her with verbal harassment and threatening, which is considered domestic violence. This means we can get a restraining order and sue her in court. But honestly, I don't want to go that way. I will respect the bond my husband had with them and be nice as a tribute to him. If they harm my children or me, I'll simply walk away from their life. Our absence will affect them more than anything else. After meeting with my lawyer and finding a solution, I went straight to my boss's office the next day. I fixed a meeting with her and explained the situation. She looked worried and told me a bit about her friendship with my mother-in-law. They were just normal friends whose sons grew up together. She also shared how my husband was like a son to her, and they were great friends. She lost her son in a school violence incident and always kept in contact with my husband to feel close to him. She also told me that I was offered the job because of my own capability, not because I was a family friend. She assured me that nothing other than unprofessional behavior during office hours could jeopardize my job. Feeling secure about my job, I thought things would settle down. However, a few days later, my mother-in-law came to my house demanding that I transfer the ownership of the house to her. I firmly told her no and asked her to contact me only through my lawyer. She reacted by calling me names and shouting outside, causing a scene. The neighbors noticed and came forward to help, but she had already left. She returned in the evening, threatening not to leave my property until I signed some papers she brought. It was a complete disaster. I called the cops and she was arrested for trespassing on my property. My father-in-law bailed her out of jail, but now she has signed an agreement never to contact me or my kids again. She is also prohibited from coming within 100 feet of us. If my father-in-law tries anything, he could be put in jail too. He's heartbroken that he won't see his grandchildren for a while, but it's safer this way. It's better for me to stay away from their money-hungry behavior. All our family members who have good relationships with me have blacklisted them, and our friends have done the same. My boss found out about it when my mother-in-law contacted her to try to get me fired. She refused and has been avoiding her calls since. That's really all for now. The fact that you think you're the a-hole speaks volumes about your self-esteem. No, you are not the a-hole and never will be in the eyes of a sane, nice person. Get those toxic in-laws out of your and your kids' lives. They deserve nothing, and there's a reason they got nothing in the first place. I see that you respect your husband a lot, but their presence will only expose you to toxic environments and harm your and your kids' mental health. Your safety and sanity are the priority here, and your kids deserve much better. I don't care how nice your father-in-law is to them. Both of your in-laws are toxic and good for nothing. Cutting them off before they cause more trouble is the best decision. It's eye-opening to see this kind of stuff happens to people. Reddit really opens your eyes to the real world sometimes. I would have never imagined this kind of toxic behavior goes on in someone's life who has already seen enough. You are not the a-hole, but your mother-in-law and father-in-law certainly are. After everything, they haven't changed and probably never will. It's best to drop those toxic people from your life. They deserve their own special place back in hell.